Ruth Daniels was a quiet, determined woman with a strength that couldn't be easily seen but always felt. She was in her mid-30s with smooth, dark skin, a kind smile, and eyes that held stories of both pain and resilience. Ruth worked long hours as a nurse, caring for people who sometimes didn't even thank her, but she always believed in doing what was right. It was a chilly Thursday morning in 1963, and Ruth was on her way home after another exhausting night shift at St. Mary's Hospital. She walked briskly to the bus stop, her wool coat wrapped tightly around her. Her hands carried a modest brown bag with her lunch container and a small book, a mystery novel she hoped to finish that weekend. Ruth wasn't one to complain, but today she was tired, physically and emotionally. She just wanted to sit down and rest during the ride home. When the bus pulled up, she stepped inside and paid her fare. The bus driver, a man named Hank Porter, barely glanced at her. Hank was in his early 50s, with a burly build and a gruff demeanor. He had been driving buses in Birmingham, Alabama, for over 20 years, and he liked to run things his way. Hank wasn't fond of change, and he definitely wasn't fond of anyone challenging him. Ruth looked around the bus. There were several empty seats near the front. She settled into one, grateful to finally rest her legs. The bus was quiet, with just a few passengers scattered throughout. Most of them were white, staring out of the windows or reading newspapers. As the bus began to move, Hank's eyes darted to the mirror above his seat. He noticed Ruth sitting in the section marked for white passengers. His jaw tightened and his grip on the steering wheel hardened. He muttered something under his breath before pulling the bus to an abrupt stop at the next corner. "Hey, you," he barked, twisting around in his seat to glare at Ruth. "You can't sit there. Move to the back." Ruth looked up, startled. Her voice was steady but polite. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Hank snapped. "Get to the back where you belong." The bus fell silent. The other passengers turned to watch. Ruth's heart raced, but she didn't move. She wasn't trying to start a scene, but she also knew she was just as entitled to sit there as anyone else. "I paid my fare," she said calmly. "I'm not breaking any rules by sitting here." Hank's face turned red. He stood up from his seat and pointed a finger toward the back of the bus. "You either move or I'll make you move." One of the passengers, an older white man in a brown hat, spoke up. "Just leave her alone, Hank. She's not bothering anyone." But Hank ignored him. "I said move," he shouted. Ruth took a deep breath. She thought about her family, about all the people who had endured far worse just for standing their ground. She stayed in her seat. Hank stomped back to the driver's seat, muttering angrily. "Fine. Have it your way," he growled. He slammed the door shut and started driving again, this time faster than before. The bus swayed as it turned sharp corners, and a few passengers held onto their seats nervously. 3 minutes later, as Hank was speeding down Elm Street, a loud bang echoed through the bus. The front tire had blown out. Hank lost control for a moment, and the bus skidded to the side of the road, jerking to a stop. Passengers gasped and held onto the railings. Hank cursed under his breath and got out to inspect the damage. The tire was completely flat, and he didn't have a spare. He kicked the side of the bus in frustration, his anger bubbling over. Meanwhile, Ruth sat quietly, watching the scene unfold. A younger woman sitting behind her leaned forward and whispered, "Looks like karma doesn't take long, does it?" Within minutes, another bus from the same route pulled up behind them. The driver, a kind man named Thomas Miller, stepped out. "Everybody okay here?" he called out. Hank explained the situation, but Thomas's attention was drawn to Ruth, who was now standing near the door. "Ma'am, would you like to board my bus?" he asked, tipping his cap politely. Ruth smiled and nodded. "Thank you." The other passengers began to follow, but Thomas stopped Hank. "You'll need to stay here and wait for the tow truck," he said firmly. Hank tried to protest, but Thomas cut him off. "You're responsible for this bus. My job is to take care of your passengers." As Ruth settled into her new seat, Thomas made an announcement. "This bus welcomes everyone. Sit wherever you like. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that made Ruth's heart swell with hope. Back on the roadside, Hank stood fuming, watching as his passengers and his pride were carried away. Ruth didn't look back. She had more important things to focus on: her family, her work, and the belief that standing up for what's right was always worth it. That day, Ruth became more than just a passenger. She became a quiet symbol of dignity and strength, a reminder that change often starts with one person refusing to move. And for Hank, well, he learned that sometimes karma arrives faster than the next bus. That's all the story, friends. I hope you liked it. Please subscribe to my channel for more exciting content. And don't forget to comment below and let me know what country you're watching from.